After Great Britain declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, Australia joined in the fight as part of the British Commonwealth. After the successful German invasion of France, Italian leader Il Duce Benito Mussolini wanted to show the Germans that Italy could start a fight with the Allies too, so he ordered the Italian 10th Army to advance into British-controlled Egypt. The Italians promptly advanced almost 60 miles, halted, dug in, and demanded reinforcements. The interesting thing is that, unknown to the Italians, there were few Commonwealth troops in front of them at that time guarding Egypt. The British Western Desert Force consisted of roughly 36,000 soldiers and only about 65 tanks. If the Italians had continued the advance, they almost certainly would have taken the entire country against token resistance. This Egyptian invasion alarmed the British. Egypt not only had the Suez Canal, but was a vital supply location for the British in Africa. Even though the British at this time were greatly outnumbered by the Italians, they devised a very good plan, called Operation Compass, to bluff and bluster and throw sand in the Italian soldiers' eyes. At the very least, the attacks might scare the Italians into making no further advances into Egypt, and at best it might kick the Italians out of Egypt and make further gains into Libya. Reinforcements were brought in from the Commonwealth to bolster the WWII. The Australian diggers had deployed to the North African desert to support their British brothers in arms in late 1940. They received further training, but not all of their equipment had arrived yet. Even so, they made do with what they had. 6 days after the start of the Commonwealth counterattack in mid-December, the Australian 6th Division relieved the Indian 4th Division. Australia also contributed airmen to the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, as mentioned in an earlier video about it. Since it covers the subject so well, nothing more will be mentioned about it in this video. Operation Compass took the Italians totally by surprise, who believed that they were being overrun by a large army. To the Italians, the enemy seemed to be everywhere. As the Commonwealth soldiers advanced, there were pockets of resistance that had been bypassed by the British 7th Armoured Division, usually fortresses, that were still manned by large Italian garrisons. At this point, this was entirely a British and Italian battle, and the Afrika Korps had not gotten into the fight yet. The Australian 6th Division was given the hard task of capturing 2 isolated Italian fortresses. The first fortress target was Bardia. The Australians bravely attacked with support from British Matilda tanks and overcame the defensive lines, even though the Italians actually had more men and were in fortified positions. Most of the Italians surrendered within 2 days. Later recounting the history of this, even though he wasn't personally involved in this battle, Rommel wrote, "On the 19th of December, Wavell's forces appeared in front of Bardia and began to lay siege to the fortress. Under cover of RAF bombs and the shells of the Royal Navy, the superb Australian infantry stormed the fortress and forced 20,000 Italians to surrender. The Italian commandant successfully escaped to Tobruk. The 6th Australian Division, led by Major General Mackay, fought the Battle of Bardia on January 3rd through the 5th, 1941. Even though Rommel mentioned 20,000 Italian prisoners taken, it was actually double that at 40,000 and 462 guns taken. It was the first battle of World War II in which an Australian army formation took part, the first to be commanded by an Australian general, and the first to be planned by an Australian staff. The next fortress target was Tobruk on January 21st. It fell within a day, with a total bag of 25,000 Italian prisoners and 256 guns. Again, Rommel wrote about the predominantly Australian attack. Despite its tremendously strong defenses, its garrison of 25,000 men and powerful artillery formations with their plentiful supply of stores, this first-class stronghold only managed to hold out for a fortnight, after which the defense collapsed in an attack mainly conducted by infantry tanks. The Italian troops had no real means of defense against the heavily armored British vehicles. Tobruk was actually enveloped on the 6th of January by the 7th Armored Division, but the 6th Australian Division was not completely assembled and ready to deliver the assault until a fortnight later. The attack opened on the 21st, and by early next morning all resistance had been overcome. Notice that Rommel mentioned that the Italians couldn't defeat the British tanks. These were probably Matildas. The Australian 6th Division later pushed west along the coast road and captured Benghazi on February 4th. Rommel complimented Australian speed in the advance. The British Northern Column, with Australians in the lead, made rapid progress. 5 days later, Western Desert Force's Operation Compass was halted because of a need for repairs and resupply. This operation had exceeded even the most optimistic of British hopes and unhinged the Italian positions in North Africa. Due to an earlier commitment, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill ordered a large Commonwealth expeditionary force to support Greece against the upcoming German invasion in Operation Leicester, and the Australian 6th Division was sent. The Australian 9th Division replaced them in the line in North Africa. The exploits of the Western Desert Force earned a parody of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's famous quote, "Never has so much been owed by so many to so few." So many Italians were captured by the Western Desert Force that British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden joked, "Never has so much been surrendered by so many to so few." Germany and Italy responded to these defeats by rushing Italian reinforcements to Libya to defend Tripoli, assisted by the Deutsches Afrika Korps and the increased Luftwaffe presence. Almost all German generals and senior officers had fought in the First World War. Although initially some of the German leadership may have believed that Australians were just British troops with different hats, time would adjust their thinking in a major way. They probably had heard about the Australians at Gallipoli in the First Great War and how the Australians were feared in hand-to-hand combat. Later, when Rommel planned an attack on Tobruk in 1941, he compared his own troops' training to his British and Australian counterparts. Meanwhile, feverish training was going on among the forces detailed for the attack, as it had become only too evident that the training of our infantry in position warfare was nowhere near up to the standard of the British and Australians. This we now intended to correct. Later on in the same battle for Tobruk, some Australians had the bravery and audacity to try to raid a German ammunition dump, but were captured. Rommel watched them marched off to the stockade and related in admiration. Shortly afterwards, a batch of some 50 or 60 Australian prisoners was marched off close beside us, immensely big and powerful men, who without question represented an elite formation of the British Empire, a fact that was also evident in battle. A year later, in the First Battle of El Alamein, Rommel paid a compliment to either the South Africans or the Australians, or both, about the heavy enemy artillery fire and the extremely well-constructed line, which included many dug-in tanks. But the attack miscarried, not even reaching the line of the 9th Australian Division, which had taken over the fortress area from the 1st South African several days before. The reason for this failure, apart from the heavy enemy artillery fire and their extremely well-constructed line, which included many dug-in tanks. In a letter to his wife Lucia, Rommel wrote, implying that Australians were worthy opponents. With the sun at their backs, our units fought their way forward from south to north as far as the area between the road and the railway, where the attack came to a halt. Fierce fighting followed with the Australians, whom we knew only too well from the time of the Tobruk siege, and lasted well into the night. Rommel mentioned how the Australians were trying to roll up our front. The Australians had attacked from El Alamein again, this time towards the southwest. They had soon penetrated our line, and had taken a large number of Italians prisoner. Now they were trying to roll up our front to the south. Rommel mentioned Australian bravery, attacking and overcoming through a curtain of fire, although the Germans later counterattacked and regained the position. On the moonlit night of the 26th of July 1942, the Australians attacked again, this time in brigade strength. Their objective was the German line west. The assembly had been made in all secrecy, and the assault, which was preceded by a violent RAF bombing attack, consequently achieved a considerable measure of surprise. Despite the curtain of fire which was at once put down by the German-Italian artillery, the Australians succeeded in penetrating our front and wiping out the greater part of one German battalion. Rommel stated that Australian and New Zealand infantry were excellent, while discussing battle tactics in the desert. In this form of action, the full value of the excellent Australian and New Zealand infantry would be realized, and the British artillery would have its effect. To German soldiers, the Australians fought unlike any men they had ever faced, and some of these Germans had fought the Russians on the Eastern Front. Apparently, they were some of the toughest soldiers in the war. They were hardy and excellent soldiers who fought for their mates. Rommel wrote in his diary that the Aussie defense of El Alamein made it impossible to take at the moment. Although it's unclear which battle of El Alamein Rommel meant exactly, it's understandable that he didn't want to broadcast that outlook to the rest of his Afrika Korps. Some Germans hated fighting the Australians because they considered them to be like animals from down under by the way they fought in both world wars. According to at least one source, Australian soldiers didn't always consider it a high priority in the heat of battle to take enemy prisoners, unless specifically ordered to do so, or there were very large numbers of them surrendering en masse, like at Bardia or Tobruk. Enemy machine gunners were especially hated and invariably got shot or stuck. The esteemed Afrika Korps was very impressed with the Australians they fought and had a healthy respect for them. In every source, you won't find any bad comments from any German, whether a regular soldier or a field marshal like Rommel, but many comments held the Australian forces in very high regard, with adjectives like excellent and powerful. However, there wasn't always a great deal of respect for their British commanders, and it would take Montgomery's arrival to change that attitude. A popular story at the time, which may or may not be true, is that when Montgomery was appointed to command the Commonwealth Army in North Africa, he remarked, "After having an easy war, things have now got much more difficult. A colleague is supposed to have told him to cheer up, at which point Montgomery said, 'I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Rommel.'" According to many people, Rommel stated, "If I had to take hell, I would use the Australians to take it and the New Zealanders to hold it." Perhaps he did say this, because so many people have repeated it, but no original source can be found for this quote. If anyone does have an original source, please share it in the comments section, because many people would like to read it. At the end of Operation Compass, Commonwealth soldiers took over 138,000 Italian and Libyan prisoners, hundreds of tanks, and more than 1,000 guns, and many aircraft, against WDF losses of 1,900 men killed and wounded, which was about 10% of the Allied infantry. So, here's the surprise that will probably change your mind about Rommel's attitude toward Australian soldiers forever. At the end of the war, Rommel's family hid his trunk with his photographs and memorabilia. According to his son Manfred, "The trunk contained my father's complete set of camera equipment, personal effects, and about 3,000 snapshots which my father had himself taken. He was particularly proud of his color photographs, some of which had been taken with a certain amount of danger to himself. One, I remember, which was most impressive, showed Australian infantry attacking with bayonets. Notice that the photographs were taken by Rommel himself at great danger in the midst of battle. Rommel was so impressed by Australian infantry attacking with bayonets that he photographed them while they were attacking, and then brought back the pictures to his home as keepsakes." Most of the Australian soldiers just wanted the war to end to get back to their girlfriends or wives. To say what the Aussies thought of the Germans, well, no worries, mate. I hope you enjoyed this video. Videos for other nations of the Commonwealth are being planned and created.